The spotlight burned hot against Jimin's skin as the final note of the song dissolved into silence. His voice had trembled, but it wasn't the falter that stunned the stadium. It was the sudden glimmer of tears rolling down his cheeks. The crowd, usually erupting in thunderous cheers, froze in collective breath. A silence heavier than any scream fell upon the arena. Jungkook's heart clenched. He had seen those tears before, but never here, never in front of millions. His gaze locked on Jimin, and in that instant he knew. He knew the reason, the secret that Jimin had carried like a wound beneath his flawless smile. The stage lights flickered, painting Jimin in hues of gold and shadow, his expression torn between vulnerability and defiance. He tried to mask it with a bow, but his trembling hands betrayed him. Jungkook stepped closer, his chest tight with urgency, the memory of whispered confessions echoing in his mind, confessions Jimin had begged him to keep hidden. Behind the music, behind the choreography, there was a fracture no one else could see. Jimin's tears weren't born from exhaustion or performance pressure. They were the manifestation of something deeper, something raw. Jungkook had pieced it together. The late-night rehearsals where Jimin lingered long after everyone left, the way he avoided certain lyrics, the way his laughter sometimes cracked like glass. The army watched in stunned silence, unaware of the storm raging between the two. Jungkook's instinct screamed to reach out, to shield Jimin from the weight of the world, but he hesitated. To comfort him here under the blinding gaze of thousands would expose the truth Jimin had fought so hard to bury. The music faded, the applause delayed, and in that fragile pause, Jungkook's mind raced. He remembered the promise he had made, to protect Jimin's secret, even if it meant carrying the burden alone. Yet now, as Jimin's tears shimmered under the lights, Jungkook realized that silence could be as cruel as betrayal. The concert continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. Every lyric, every step carried the echo of Jimin's pain. Jungkook sang with renewed intensity, his voice trembling with unspoken words, his eyes never leaving Jimin's fragile silhouette. And though ARMY remained captivated, hushed by the sight of their idol's tears, Jungkook knew this was only the beginning. The secret he carried was no longer his alone, it was bleeding into the music, into the silence, into the very soul of the stage. The echo of silence from the concert still lingered in Jungkook's mind long after the lights dimmed and the crowd dispersed. He sat alone in the dressing room, the faint scent of sweat and stage makeup clinging to the air, his hands clenched tightly as if holding onto something invisible. Jimin had left earlier, his eyes red, his steps unsteady, and Jungkook could not shake the image of those tears shimmering under the spotlight. The memory replayed with cruel precision, the way Jimin's voice cracked, the way his body trembled as though carrying a weight too heavy for one soul. Jungkook had seen pain before, but this was different. This was a fracture that threatened to consume him. He rose abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor, and pushed open the door. The hallway was dim, lined with posters of past performances, but it felt suffocating, as though the walls themselves whispered secrets. He followed the faint sound of water running, leading him to the practice room where Jimin often sought refuge. Inside, Jimin stood before the mirror, his reflection fractured by streaks of tears. His hands gripped the edge of the sink, knuckles white, as if he were holding himself together by sheer force. Jungkook froze at the doorway, torn between the urge to comfort and the fear of breaking the fragile barrier Jimin had built around himself. "Why now?" Jimin whispered, his voice trembling, unaware Jungkook was listening. "Why here in front of them?" Jungkook stepped forward, his voice low, careful. "Because you can't hide it anymore." Jimin's head snapped up, his eyes wide, shimmering with both fear and defiance. "You don't understand," he said, his tone sharp, but beneath it lay desperation. If they knew, if anyone knew, everything would fall apart. Jungkook's chest tightened. He did understand more than Jimin realized. He had pieced together fragments of late-night confessions, the sleepless rehearsals, the way Jimin's laughter sometimes carried the weight of sorrow. He knew the secret wasn't just about exhaustion or pressure. It was something deeper, something that clawed at Jimin's soul. The room seemed to shrink around them, the hum of the fluorescent lights buzzing like static in the silence. Jungkook reached out, his hand hovering near Jimin's shoulder, hesitant. "You don't have to carry it alone," he said softly. "Not anymore." Jimin flinched, his body rigid, as though the offer of comfort was more terrifying than the pain itself. He turned away, his reflection fractured in the mirror, his voice breaking. "If you knew the whole truth, you wouldn't say that." The words cut deep, leaving Jungkook breathless. He wanted to demand answers, to tear down the walls Jimin had built, but he knew forcing it would only push him further away. Instead, he stood in silence, his presence a quiet promise. Outside, the city pulsed with life, neon lights flickering against the night sky, but inside the practice room, time seemed suspended. Two souls stood on the edge of revelation, bound by secrets and silence, each afraid of the consequences of truth. Jungkook's gaze lingered on Jimin, his heart heavy with the knowledge that the tears on stage were not the end, but the beginning of something far more dangerous. And though Jimin tried to hide behind fragile smiles and broken laughter, Jungkook knew the storm was coming, and he would be there whether Jimin wanted him or not. The night deepened, shadows stretching across the room, and in that fragile stillness, Jungkook realized that the secret Jimin carried was not just his own. It was theirs now, a burden shared, a truth waiting to shatter everything they thought they knew. The rain hammered against the studio windows, a relentless rhythm that mirrored the turmoil inside Jungkook's chest. He sat on the floor, his back pressed against the wall, watching Jimin pace the room like a trapped soul. Every step was sharp, restless, as though he was trying to outrun the weight of his own thoughts. "Do you think they noticed?" Jimin's voice cracked, his words trembling in the dim light. His hands tugged at the sleeves of his hoodie, a nervous habit Jungkook had seen countless times before. "Do you think ARMY saw more than just tears?" Jungkook hesitated, his gaze steady. "They saw you, Jimin, and that's enough to make them worry." Jimin stopped packing, his shoulders rigid, his breath uneven. He turned slowly, his eyes hollow yet burning with something Jungkook couldn't quite name. "Worry is dangerous," he whispered. "Worry leads to questions, questions lead to truths, and truths destroy everything." The words hung heavy in the air like smoke refusing to dissipate. Jungkook rose, his movements deliberate, his voice low but firm. "You can't keep running from it. Whatever it is, it's eating you alive, and if you keep hiding, it'll consume you." Jimin's lips parted, but no words came. His silence was louder than any confession, his trembling hands betraying the storm within. Jungkook stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking, his presence steady against Jimin's unraveling. "I know more than you think," Jungkook said softly, his eyes locking onto Jimin's. "I've seen the way you break when no one's watching. I've heard the things you whisper when you think you're alone. You don't have to say it, I already know." Jimin's breath hitched, his eyes widening in shock and fear. "Then you know why I can't let it out," he said, his voice barely audible. "If the truth comes out, it won't just destroy me, it'll destroy us." The rain outside grew heavier, drowning the silence between them. Jungkook's heart pounded, torn between the urge to demand the full truth and the need to protect Jimin from his own fragility. He reached out, his hand brushing against Jimin's arm, grounding him in the chaos. "You're not alone," Jungkook whispered. "Even if the truth is unbearable, I'll carry it with you." Jimin's eyes glistened, his body trembling as though the weight of Jungkook's words threatened to shatter him. For a moment, he allowed himself to lean into the comfort, his defenses cracking under the pressure of vulnerability. But then, as quickly as it came, the moment dissolved. Jimin pulled away, his expression hardening, his voice sharp. "No, Jungkook, you don't understand. Some secrets aren't meant to be shared. Some truths are poison." Room fell into silence, the rain outside the only witness to their fractured bond. Jungkook stood frozen, his heart aching, his resolve deepening. He knew Jimin was hiding something that could change everything, something that threatened not just their friendship but the very foundation of their world. And though Jimin tried to bury it beneath silence and denial, Jungkook knew the storm was far from over. The truth was coming, whether Jimin wanted it or not, and when it did, nothing would ever be the same again. The rehearsal room was drenched in shadows, the only light a faint glow from the street lamps outside. Jimin sat hunched over the piano, his fingers pressing keys without melody, each note a broken fragment of thought. The sound was haunting, incomplete, like a confession trapped in music. Jungkook leaned against the doorway, his chest heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. "Why do you keep punishing yourself like this?" Jungkook's voice cut through the silence, low but firm. Jimin didn't look up. His shoulders trembled, his reflection in the polished piano surface fractured. "Because it's the only way I can breathe," he whispered. "If I stop, the memories come back, and I can't face them." Jungkook stepped closer, the floor creaking beneath his weight. He could see the exhaustion etched into Jimin's face, the way his eyes carried shadows deeper than sleepless nights. "You think drowning yourself in music will erase the pain. It won't, it only hides it." Jimin's fingers froze on the keys, the silence deafening. Slowly he turned, his gaze locking onto Jungkook with a raw intensity. "You don't understand. The pain isn't mine alone. If the truth comes out, it will destroy everything we've built. The stage, the songs, the bond we share, it will all collapse." Jungkook's jaw tightened. He wanted to argue, to tear down the walls Jimin had built, but the fear in his voice was undeniable. He crouched beside him, his hand resting lightly on the piano, grounding them both. "Then let me carry it with you. Whatever it is, I won't let it break us." Jimin's lips trembled, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. For a moment, he seemed ready to speak, to finally release the secret that haunted him. But then, as if struck by an invisible force, he recoiled, shaking his head violently. "No, if you knew you'd hate me, you'd never look at me the same again." The words sliced through Jungkook, leaving him breathless. He wanted to protest, to swear that nothing could change how he saw Jimin, but the desperation in his voice silenced him. Instead, he reached out, his hand brushing against Jimin's trembling fingers. "Try me," Jungkook whispered. "I'm not afraid of your truth." Jimin's eyes widened, his breath catching. The piano seemed to echo the tension, its silent keys reflecting the weight of the moment. He opened his mouth, but before the words could escape, the door creaked open. Taehyung stood there, his expression unreadable, his presence heavy with suspicion. His gaze flicked between Jimin and Jungkook, lingering on the closeness of their hands. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice calm but edged with something darker. Jimin froze, his body rigid, his secret locked once more behind trembling lips. Jungkook straightened, his heart pounding, knowing that Taehyung's arrival had shifted the balance. The storm was no longer just between him and Jimin, it was spreading, pulling others into its orbit. The room fell into silence, the tension thick, the rain outside pounding like a drumbeat of fate. And in that fragile moment, Jungkook realized that the truth Jimin carried was not just a secret, it was a fracture that threatened to tear them all apart. The tension in the room was suffocating. Taehyung's eyes lingered on Jimin, sharp and searching, while Jungkook stood frozen, his pulse pounding in his ears. The piano between them felt like a barrier, a fragile wall separating truth from exposure. "What are you hiding?" Taehyung's voice was calm, but beneath it lay suspicion, a quiet storm waiting to break. His gaze flicked between Jimin's trembling hands and Jungkook's steady stance, reading the silence like a puzzle. Jimin's breath caught, his lips parting as though to speak, but no words came. His body was rigid, his eyes darting to Jungkook for rescue, for denial, for anything that could shield him from Taehyung's piercing stare. Jungkook stepped forward, his voice steady but edged with urgency. "It's nothing, just exhaustion." The concert took a toll on him. Taehyung tilted his head, unconvinced. Exhaustion doesn't make someone cry like that on stage. Exhaustion doesn't make someone look like they're carrying the weight of the world. The silence grew heavier, pressing down on them like a physical force. Jimin's hands clenched into fists, his nails digging into his palms, his body trembling with the effort of holding himself together. "Taehyung, please," Jimin whispered, his voice fragile, pleading. "Not now." But Taehyung didn't relent. He stepped closer, his presence commanding, his eyes burning with determination. "If you're in pain, we deserve to know. If something is threatening us, we need to face it together. Secrets only destroy." Jungkook's chest tightened. He knew Taehyung was right, but the fear in Jimin's eyes was undeniable. To force the truth now would shatter him. Jungkook placed himself between them, his voice firm. "He'll tell us when he's ready. Until then, respect his silence." Taehyung's jaw clenched, his frustration palpable. He turned his gaze back to Jimin, his voice softer but no less piercing. "You can't keep running forever. Whatever this is, it will come out, and when it does, it won't just hurt you, it'll hurt all of us." Jimin's eyes glistened, his body trembling as though the weight of Taehyung's words threatened to break him. He turned away, his reflection fractured in the piano's surface, his voice barely audible. "I know." The rain outside intensified, pounding against the windows like a relentless drumbeat. The three of them stood in silence, bound by secrets and suspicion, each carrying a burden too heavy to share. And in that fragile moment, Jungkook realized the storm was no longer just Jimin's. It was theirs now, a fracture spreading through their bond, threatening to tear them apart from within.
The rehearsal hall was thick with tension, the air heavy with the residue of unspoken words. Jimin stood at the center, his body rigid, his eyes fixed on the floor as if the polished wood could swallow his secrets whole. Jungkook lingered nearby, his gaze locked on Jimin, while Taehyung leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his silence sharper than any accusation. The music began soft, deliberate, a test of harmony. Jimin's voice rose, flawless in pitch but hollow in emotion. Each note was precise, calculated, yet stripped of the warmth that once defined him. Jungkook sang beside him, his voice trembling with something deeper, a plea woven into melody. Taehyung watched, his eyes narrowing. He could see it, the fracture between them, the way Jimin's body moved with mechanical precision, his soul absent from the performance. When Jungkook's hand brushed against Jimin's shoulder in a subtle gesture of reassurance, Jimin flinched, his expression tightening, his voice faltering for the briefest moment. The silence that followed was deafening. Jimin lowered the microphone, his chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. Jungkook stepped closer, his voice low, urgent. "You don't have to keep shutting me out. I can't stand watching you break like this." Jimin's eyes glistened, his lips trembling as though words clawed at his throat, desperate to escape. But instead of confession, he turned away, his voice sharp, brittle. "Stop trying to save me, Jungkook. You don't know what you're asking for." Taehyung's voice cut through the tension, calm but edged with steel. "He's right, Jimin. You're not just hurting yourself, you're hurting us. Every time you hide, every time you shut down, you drag us deeper into your silence." Jimin's body stiffened, his hands trembling at his sides. He wanted to speak, to release the truth that burned inside him, but fear held him captive. His silence was a prison and the walls were closing in. Jungkook's chest ached, his voice breaking as he whispered, "Then let me share the burden. Even if it destroys me, I'd rather fall with you than watch you fall alone." The words hung in the air, raw and unyielding. Jimin's eyes widened, his breath catching, his defenses cracking under the weight of Jungkook's sincerity. For a fleeting moment, he allowed himself to believe in the possibility of release, of trust. But then, as if struck by the memory of the secret he carried, he recoiled, his voice trembling. "No, if you knew the truth, you'd never forgive me." The rehearsal ended in silence, the music abandoned, the bond between them fraying under the weight of secrets. Jimin walked away, his figure swallowed by shadows, leaving Jungkook and Taehyung standing in the emptiness, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that the storm was far from over. And as the door closed behind him, Jungkook realized that Jimin's tears on stage had only been the beginning. The truth was still hidden, buried deep, waiting to erupt, and when it did, it would change everything. The night was restless, the city outside buzzing with neon lights and distant echoes of traffic, but inside the dorm, silence reigned. Jimin sat curled on the couch, his knees drawn to his chest, his eyes fixed on the floor as though it held the answers he refused to speak. Jungkook hovered nearby, his presence steady but tense, while Taehyung leaned against the window, his silhouette framed by the glow of the street lamps. "Enough hiding," Taehyung said finally, his voice low but unyielding. "You can't keep us in the dark, Jimin. Whatever this is, it's tearing you apart, and it's tearing us apart too." Jimin's breath trembled, his fingers tightening around the fabric of his hoodie. He wanted to speak, to release the truth that burned inside him, but fear clamped down on his throat. His silence was a prison, and he was both inmate and guard. Jungkook stepped closer, his voice softer, pleading, "You don't have to carry it alone. I promised you, did I? No matter what it is, I'll stand beside you." Jimin's eyes flickered to Jungkook, shimmering with desperation. For a moment, his defenses cracked, his lips parting as though the words were finally ready to escape. But then the weight of memory struck him, and he recoiled, shaking his head violently. "You don't understand. If I tell you, everything changes. The way you see me, the way Army sees me, it all collapses." Taehyung's jaw tightened, his frustration palpable. He pushed away from the window, his steps deliberate, his gaze piercing. "Secrets don't protect, Jimin, they destroy. And if you keep this locked inside, it'll consume you until there's nothing left." The room pulsed with tension, the silence louder than any scream. Jimin's body trembled, his breath uneven, his heart pounding against the cage of his ribs. He wanted to confess, to surrender, but the fear of rejection, of betrayal, of collapse held him captive. Jungkook reached out, his hand brushing against Jimin's trembling fingers, grounding him in the chaos. "Then let me fall with you," he whispered. "Even if it breaks me, I'd rather know the truth than lose you to silence." Jimin's eyes widened, his breath catching, his defenses crumbling under the weight of Jungkook's sincerity. For a fleeting moment, he allowed himself to believe in the possibility of release, of trust. His lips parted, his voice trembling. "It's not just about me, it's about all of us. And if the truth comes out, it won't just destroy me. It'll destroy everything we've built." The words hung heavy in the air, raw and unyielding. Taehyung's expression softened, his frustration giving way to concern. Jungkook's grip tightened, his resolve unshaken. And in that fragile moment, Jimin realized the storm was no longer his alone. It was theirs now, a burden shared, a truth waiting to erupt. The silence was breaking, the fracture widening, and the secret he had buried so deeply was clawing its way to the surface. The night deepened, shadows stretching across the room, and in the fragile stillness, Jimin knew the time was coming. The truth would not stay hidden forever, and when it finally emerged, it would change everything. The dorm lights flickered faintly, casting long shadows across the room. Jimin sat at the edge of the bed, his body trembling, his eyes locked on the floor as though the truth he carried was etched into the wood beneath him. Jungkook stood close, his presence steady but tense, while Taehyung leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, his gaze sharp and unyielding. "I can't keep this inside anymore," Jimin whispered, his voice fragile, breaking the silence that had suffocated them for days. His hands shook as he gripped the sheets, his knuckles pale, his breath uneven. "It's killing me." Jungkook's chest tightened, his heart pounding with anticipation. He stepped closer, his voice soft, pleading. "Then let it out. Whatever it is, I'll carry it with you. I promised you that." Taehyung's eyes narrowed, his tone firm but not unkind. "We're not your enemies, Jimin. We're your brothers. If you're in pain, we deserve to know. We deserve to fight it with you." Jimin's lips trembled, his eyes shimmering with tears. He wanted to speak, to release the secret that had haunted him, but fear clamped down on his throat. His silence was a prison, and the walls were closing in. Finally, his voice broke through, raw and unsteady. "There's something I've hidden for years. Something I never wanted anyone to know. It's the reason I cried on stage. It's the reason I can't sleep, can't breathe, can't sing without breaking." Jungkook's breath caught, his eyes locked on Jimin, his resolve unshaken. "Tell us," he whispered. "No matter what it is, we'll face it together." Jimin's tears spilled, his body trembling as though the weight of his confession threatened to shatter him. "I've been carrying guilt that doesn't belong to the stage or the music or the fans. It's something from before, something I buried so deep I thought it would never resurface. But it's here now, clawing at me, and I can't escape it. The room fell into silence, the weight of his words pressing down on them like a storm. Taehyung's expression softened, his frustration giving way to concern. Jungkook's grip tightened, his voice steady. Whatever it is, it doesn't change who you are to us. You're Jimin, and nothing will destroy that. Jimin's sobs echoed through the room, raw and unrestrained. For the first time, he allowed himself to break, to surrender to the vulnerability he had fought so hard to hide. Jungkook wrapped his arms around him, grounding him in the chaos, while Taehyung stepped closer, his hand resting gently on Jimin's shoulder. The storm was no longer his alone. The secret he had buried was clawing its way to the surface, demanding release. And though the truth had not yet been spoken in full, the fracture was widening, the silence breaking, and the bond between them was shifting into something deeper, something unshakable. The air in the dorm was heavy, thick with anticipation. Jimin sat at the center, his body trembling, his eyes shimmering with tears that refused to fall. Jungkook knelt before him, his hands steady on Jimin's shoulders, while Taehyung stood close, his gaze sharp but softened by concern. The silence stretched, fragile yet suffocating, until Jimin finally broke it. "I can't keep it inside anymore," he whispered, his voice raw, trembling. "The reason I cried on stage, the reason I've been breaking, it's because I've been living with guilt that no one else knows." Jungkook's breath caught, his heart pounding. "Tell us," he urged softly. "No matter what it is, we'll face it together." Jimin's lips trembled, his voice breaking as the truth clawed its way out. "Years ago, before all of this, before the lights, the songs, the fans, I made a choice that hurt someone I loved. I buried it, convinced myself it didn't matter, but it's haunted me every day since. Every lyric, every performance, it all feels like a lie because I never faced what I did." Taehyung stepped closer, his voice steady. "What choice, Jimin?" Jimin's tears spilled, his body shaking as though the confession itself was tearing him apart. "I left someone behind. Someone who believed in me, someone who sacrificed for me. I promised I'd never forget them, but when success came, I shut them out. I told myself it was necessary, that I had to protect the group, protect the dream. But the truth is, I abandoned them. And now, every time I stand on stage, I see their face. That's why I cried. That's why I can't breathe." The room fell into silence, the weight of his confession pressing down on them like a storm. Jungkook's grip tightened, his voice breaking with emotion. "Jimin, you carried that alone all this time." Jimin nodded, his sobs raw, unrestrained. "I thought if I kept it hidden it would fade, but it hasn't. It's only grown heavier. And now I feel like I don't deserve any of this. The stage, the music, the love of ARMY, I feel like a fraud." Taehyung's expression softened, his frustration dissolving into empathy. He placed a hand on Jimin's shoulder, his voice firm but gentle. "You're not a fraud. You're human. You made a choice and it hurt, but it doesn't erase everything you've given, everything you've fought for. Carrying guilt doesn't make you unworthy, it makes you real." Jungkook's eyes glistened, his voice trembling with sincerity. "You're Jimin, you're the heart of us. Nothing will change that, not your past, not your guilt. We'll face it together no matter what it takes." Jimin's sobs quieted, his body trembling as he leaned into their embrace. For the first time, he allowed himself to break completely, to surrender to the vulnerability he had fought so hard to hide. Jungkook held him tightly, grounding him in the chaos, while Taehyung's hand remained steady on his shoulder, a silent promise of solidarity. The storm had finally broken. The secret was no longer his alone, and though the truth was painful, it was shared now, carried by all three of them. The fracture that had threatened to tear them apart had become a bond, fragile yet unshakable. The night stretched on, shadows lingering, but for the first time Jimin felt the weight lift. The truth had emerged, and though it left scars, it also brought healing. The tears that had silenced ARMY were no longer a burden. They were a release, a step toward freedom. And as dawn approached, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Jimin realized that the stage would never feel the same again. It would no longer be a place of hiding, but a place of truth. A place where he could finally sing without fear. The dawn crept slowly into the dorm, painting the walls with muted shades of gold. Jimin sat by the window, his eyes swollen from the night before, his body wrapped in a blanket that felt more like armor than comfort. Jungkook stirred awake on the couch, his gaze immediately finding Jimin, while Taehyung remained silent, his presence steady, his thoughts unreadable. The confession from the night before still hung in the air, heavy and raw. Jimin had finally spoken, but the wound was fresh, the guilt still gnawing at him. He turned his face toward the light, his voice trembling. I thought telling you would make it easier, but now it feels heavier, like the truth has finally taken shape and I can't escape it. Jungkook rose, his steps quiet, his voice soft but firm. It feels heavier because you've carried it alone for so long. Now it's real, shared, but that's how healing begins. Jimin's lips trembled, his eyes shimmering with doubt. What if Army finds out? What if they see me differently? What if they stop believing in me? Taehyung stepped forward, his tone calm but resolute. They won't stop. They love you because you're human, not because you're perfect, if anything. They'll love you more for your honesty, but you don't owe them every scar. Some truths are meant to be shared only with those who can carry them. The room fell into silence, the weight of Taehyung's words settling over them. Jimin's breath caught, his body trembling as though the possibility of forgiveness was more terrifying than the guilt itself. Jungkook knelt beside him, his hand steady on Jimin's shoulder. You're not alone anymore. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. Even if the world turns against us, I'll stand by you. Jimin's tears spilled, his sobs raw but quieter than before. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe in the possibility of redemption, of healing. The guilt was still there, but it no longer felt like a solitary burden. It was shared, carried by the bond that tied them together. The morning light grew stronger, illuminating the room, washing away the shadows of the night. Jimin closed his eyes, his voice breaking but resolute. Then I'll try. I'll try to forgive myself. I'll try to sing without fear again. Jungkook's grip tightened, his voice trembling with sincerity. That's all you need to do, one step at a time. Taehyung's gaze softened, his voice steady. And we'll be here for every step. The storm had passed, leaving scars but also strength. The secret was no longer a prison. It was a wound, open but healing. And as the day began, Jimin realized that the stage would never feel the same again. It would no longer be a place of hiding, but a place of truth, of freedom. The tears that had silenced Army were no longer a burden. They were a beginning. The stage was alive again, bathed in blinding lights and the roar of thousands of voices. Army filled the arena, their chants echoing like thunder, their energy pulsing through every corner of the space. Jimin stood at the center, his heart pounding, his body trembling, not from fear this time, but from the weight of truth finally shared. The music began, a familiar melody that once felt like a cage but now carried the promise of freedom. Jimin's voice rose, clear and strong, each note infused with raw emotion. The tears that had once silenced Army now shimmered as proof of his humanity, his vulnerability, his truth. Jungkook sang beside him, his gaze steady, his voice trembling with solidarity. Every lyric was a vow, every harmony a promise that he would never let Jimin carry the burden alone again. Taehyung's voice joined them, deep and resonant, weaving strength into the fragile fabric of the moment. The crowd erupted, their cheers no longer just adoration but a wave of understanding. They had seen Jimin break, they had seen him cry, and now they saw him rise. His pain was no longer hidden. It was transformed into music, into connection, into something larger than himself. As the final note lingered, Jimin closed his eyes, his chest rising with a deep, steady breath. He felt the weight lift, not completely, but enough to let him stand without breaking. The secret was no longer a prison. It was a scar, visible but healed through love, through trust, through the bond that tied them together. The lights dimmed, the applause thundered, and Jimin bowed, his tears glistening not as a burden but as a release. Army's voices rose in unison, chanting his name, their love unwavering, their faith unbroken. Jungkook's hand brushed against his, grounding him in the chaos, while Taehyung's presence stood firm beside them. Together they faced the storm, together they carried the truth, and together they sang not as idols hiding behind perfection but as humans, fragile yet unshakable. And as the curtain fell, Jimin realized that the stage would never be the same again. It was no longer a place of hiding, but a place of truth. A place where he could finally sing without fear, without guilt, without silence. The tears that had once silenced Army had become a beginning, a new chapter, a freedom he had never known.